Today I'm going to demonstrate and analyze 4 ways to use this 7 sus2 sharp 5 chord. Let's begin. So the first question you have to ask when you're using any sort of chord is whether it's a chord at rest or a chord in motion. Now, as you drink more harmony, you learn more chord structures. The amount of chords you perceive as being at rest increases. However, I'd say predominantly it's a chord in motion. And in fact, in this etude, the chord is only used as a passing chord to get from one place to another. So let's discuss the first progression here. It's basically C to C7 sus2 sharp 5, add 5, to the same version of the chord, add 4, back to C. So this is a great beginner's introduction into this chord. It's interesting because we keep the bass in C, but there's enough outside color and tension in this chord that we can create a compelling and beautiful movement even though the bass doesn't move anywhere at all. And I think it's these beautiful tensions and outside color which makes it so compelling. In fact, I would actually analyze the function of this chord in this moment to be something of a tricked out F minor chord. And you might wonder why an F minor chord if there are no F notes in this chord, but I can get back to that in a second. So let me first show you the function of the F minor chord in the key of C. So in the key of C, we got these notes. In the key of C, we go to the 4th. We build off of that. Diatonically, F has an A as its 3rd. Sounds like this. But if we lower the 3rd of that F major chord, we get a very different sound. And this chord, this F minor chord with the A flat, which is an outside color from the diatonic world of C, is one of my favorite chords. Just absolutely beautiful. However, I do frequently overuse this chord, so nowadays I try to avoid it. But because it's such a convenient way to introduce this chord, I had to use it here. But if you were to take this F minor chord and start adding a bunch of jazz tensions to it, we would start by stacking thirds. So you can add the E flat, which is the 7th, the 9, which is the G, this B flat, which is the 11, this D, which is the 13. So that's kind of like an extended F minor chord with all its color. And then all we got to do now to get back to where we were is we got to reorder some stuff. So take this B flat, move it down an octave. Take this D, move it down an octave. Get rid of this E flat, get rid of this F, and then add that C back again at the bottom. And suddenly we're back where we started here. so that's why you can see I really analyze this as an F minor chord, even though there's no F. The other important thing to note here is in this progression, we have this interesting top moving line from G to F. In the key of C, that's the 5 to the 4. So it's one of the possibilities of movement with this type of chord. And the final thing to observe is we are able to resolve this chord back into a chord of the same root. And that's how this progression works. Our next progression is C to F7 sus2 sharp 5 to F7 sharp 5 to E to E7 to A minor. Sounds like this. So our chord of the day is here, transposed to the key of F. And you'll note that in contrast to the 5 to 4 motion of our previous progression, here we have a 2 to 1 motion, which is different. And then unlike the other progression, which resolves in place, here we're resolving down half of a step. The key of F, we're going F, down half a step to E. So it's interesting that this chord can resolve to different places. Overall, this chord acts functionally as an upper approach chord. Really, we're just beautifying the basic C to E to A minor progression. But instead of going from here to E directly, we just add a moment of temporary color. Just so you can see a little bit more clearly, in case it wasn't clear enough, previously in the key of C, obviously, if I were to transpose that progression that we did just now into the key of C, it would look like. So here you can see, obviously, 2 to 1, resolved down by half of a step, minor final resolution. So there you can see how it differs more precisely. Our next progression is C to D7 sus2 sharp 5, add 5 to the same chord, add 4 to B stuff to E major-ish stuff. Sounds like this. So here our chord is transposed into the key of D here. Exact same voicing as the first progression, but everything is moved up by one whole step. And also we have the same 5 to 4 motion. But interestingly enough, the first progression resolved in place. You might suspect then that this chord would resolve in place. However, it resolves up a 6th interval. Isn't that cool? Or you can think of it as down a minor 3rd, but it doesn't matter. So once again, this chord is flexible in its resolution. Really, really pretty. However, even though it doesn't have a stepwise resolution in the bass, I would say that this resolution, the voice leading is even stronger than the previous progression, which is very interesting. So take a look at this. Top line is going 5, 4, and then these notes move down half of a step to B, the 3rd and the 5th, and then the rest of this stuff kind of moves up. That's a beautiful resolution. Let's take a look at this progression in the key of C, just so you can kind of compare. Once again, really interesting that this progression can resolve in so many places. Let's take a look at it. So in C, let me transpose this in my head real quick. right? Our last progression is C to E7 sharp 5 to E7 sus2 sharp 5 to D9 to stuff in G to C. Sounds like this. Cool. So let's explain. Here our chord is transposed into the key of E flat. And we have a different type of top motion here. This is one that we haven't seen yet. So in the key of C, so you can see it more easily, it would be like we did this. So to recap, there's a lot of different ways we can move in and around this chord. 5 to 4, 3 to 2, and 2 to 1. But to go back to the progression, we are resolving down by half of a step. So that was like our second progression, where we're going from F to E. However, because we have a 3 to 2 resolution on top with the voicing of this chord, we're able to resolve down by half step and end up on the 9th degree of the scale. Right? Whereas previously in the key of F, we were resolving down to the root. So to make this all make sense, let me resolve it in the key of C. So this is the second progression. It would be, whereas in this last progression, it would look like. Okay. So slight differences in voicings give different opportunities for color. Oh, finally, some extra stuff that's not centered around the chord if you're interested. There's kind of a lot of stuff going on at the very end, but one thing I want to focus on in this last progression. I like this chord right here. So this is a G, like 13 flat 9 chord, really. The normal voicing of that, however, is like this. Right? Where the 13th is on top. And it's really, really pretty. Love that sound. However, in this version of the chord, I take that D away, and then I crunch the E up against the F. And this cluster here is a little crunchy, and I think it's a really beautiful version of this chord. So instead of this, so, you know, octave placement of tensions is really, really important to getting different types of voicings. So I'm really proud of that one. And then the last thing, if you're interested, basically is just C with a sharp 5 added to it. And I'm just descending, really. Because in this chord, I think the sharp 5 is the most characteristic tone. So yeah, I just figured. It's a nice characteristic way to end it, to kind of call back to the chord in the first place. So that's that. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, hit the subscribe button. You can give me a thumbs up. You can comment on what types of chords you'd like me to check out for you in the future, or ask any questions you want about the progressions. And I hope to see you in the next one.